day, and welcome to this hybrid policy dialogue on economics for the European Green Deal, how to deliver sustainable prosperity, organized by the European Policy Center and supported by the European Investment Bank. My name is Stefan Sipka. I'm a senior policy analyst and EPC's acting head of the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program, and I'll be moderating this session. We are all aware of the significant challenges posed by climate change and environmental degradation. The challenges that are these are challenges to our long-term prosperity and our very own livelihoods. To achieve the green transition, it's easier said than done, and it's crucial to rethink how we produce and consume, how we do business, how and where do we invest. Economics and economy are crucial to achieve this transition. The European Green Deal sets the policy framework for the way forward and also for our economy, how to make it, how to achieve the green growth and a functional economy within the limits of our planet. As I said, this is easier said than done. 5 years after the introduction of the Green Deal, now the emphasis is more on implementation, how to walk the talk, while bearing in mind multiple challenges that we are facing at the moment, what we also call at the EPC polycrisis or permacrisis, and more specifically, rising geopolitical tensions, questions on, for example, how to make our economy both sustainable and competitive, how to address short-term, mid-term trade-offs, and how to account for possible unequal distribution of the costs for the green transition. How to cope with the rising populism, and including also the current green backlash in the run-up to the EU elections, are some of the points, some of the factors that we need to consider if we want to realistically talk about the green transition and meeting the objectives of the Green Deal, especially on climate neutrality by 2050. So these are some of the topics that we will try to address today. Of course, those are big topics. We have only 1.5 hours to discuss, but we will do our best, of course, to shed some light together with the high-level speakers we have today. What I will do, I will first introduce our panelists. We'll hear from our panelists, followed by the quick reactions from our respondents, and then we will hear from our participants. I will open the floor to them, and I would, because this is also a hybrid event, I would just ask also our online participants to write their questions as soon as they can, so we can address as many questions as possible by the end of the event. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker for the day, Ricardo Mourinho Felix, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Stefan. I'd like to thank the EPC for the invitation for this very important debate. And as a Vice President of the European Investment Bank, as you can imagine, the delivery of sustainable prosperity for a cohesive Europe lays at the core of our activities. So only 2 days ago, the Commission launched the 2024 European semester cycle. The autumn package focuses on key structural issues, on low productivity growth, on grid and digital transition, on the aging dynamics and on demographic winter, but also on social inclusion. And they have this big agenda in front of us. Europe needs to undergo this long-term transition into a green and digital economy to meet the climate targets of net zero by 2050. And at the same time, Europe needs to remain a competitive economy and to preserve the first mover advantage that Europe has as a global leader in clean technologies. Europe is a leader in clean technologies. It has almost 2 times more patents in clean technologies than the United States and 4 times more than China. And This is a leadership that Europe needs to preserve and to use to retain its competitiveness and become a competitive bloc in a sustainable world. The success of this transition depends largely on the transformation of European industry, and this requires a massive amount of investments over the next decades. And the focus must be on reducing energy and material dependencies. This related to the way we produce energy, the way we consume energy, the way we distribute the energy that we produce, such that we are more efficient and that we can use renewable energy while at the same time addressing the issue of intermittence. We need to boost Europe manufacturing and production capacities on the digital, on the clean tech, but also in the many different sectors in a sustainable manner. The only way to do this in a sustainable manner is by supporting R&D and innovation. R&D and innovation are key. With the technologies that we have today, we'll not be able to do the transition to net zero in 2050 with close or even similar well-being that we have today. This means that we need technology to do this transition while at the same time preserving the well-being of the future generations, such that we have a future successful transition. And at the same time, we face the geopolitical crisis, and we are very much aware that we need to have a resilient value chain that should be based on a strategic autonomy, but that needs to be an open strategic autonomy, meaning that it can't be a dependence of third blocks like Russia or China to become a dependence on ourselves. We need to find many suppliers inside you and outside you, such that we are really resilient, and that if a shock comes in some part outside or inside Europe, we have the ability to keep the supply chains, the value chains working. The recently announced Green Deal Industrial Plan reinforces Europe to reinforce Europe's competitiveness and the strategic autonomy, lays foundations on a more predictable and simplified and efficient regulatory framework, and as well as an increase in faster financing for strategic investments. Of course, that all the above measures are extremely welcome because the task is immense. But the question then comes, how can we remain competitive? How can we do the transition at the same time? And how can we ensure that this transition is a just transition, that the costs and the benefits are distributed in a fair manner? On the IB side, the IB group stands ready to support. We have been supporting this transition. We started with the Climate Bank roadmap back in 2020, and we assumed compromises. We are in line with the commitments that we assume. We are now doing 58% of our annual activity, of our annual funding for climate action and environmental sustainability. All the projects are Paris aligned, and we are on the way to meet the mobilization of 1 trillion euros in this critical decade, 2020-2030. Is this enough? Well, with the change in the geopolitical situation, maybe it's not enough. Maybe we need to do more, and that's precisely what we decided to do when we put forward our package to support REPowerEU. In 2022, we invested 20 billion in energy efficiency, renewable energy, electricity, and storage. We invested 15 billion in innovation and digital transition and in human capital, and 25 billion in supporting the SMEs and the mid-caps. And on top of this, we approved this package, REPowerEU package, which is 45 billion euros for the next 5 years to precisely support the energy sector in Europe, to support renewable energy grids, energy efficiency, such that we reduce our energy dependency and that we become more resilient. We have come through a period of large fiscal and monetary stimulus. So after the financial crisis, we have a quite substantial monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus. Then the COVID crisis came. We put on top of this additional public funds for having additional public stimulus. And now we are coming to a stage where we need to be more targeted, where we need to target our public support, where we need to use public support to crowd in more and more and more private resources, because the size of the challenge is so big that with just public resources we'll never get there. There'll be not enough public resources. Debt levels that are already high in many countries will go even further above if we just rely on public resources, and this will be simply non-sustainable. So if it's not sustainable, will not happen even if we try, and this will be a big mistake. So we need to find mechanisms that combine public and private resources and that use small amounts of public resources to leverage private resources. And that's where EIB and the national promotional banks and institutions can come into the picture. That's what we know how to do, and which is precisely using public money. The multiplier on average of the EIB, it's 5 times, meaning that for each euro of our own resources, we can mobilize 4 euros of external resources, sometimes private sector resources, sometimes Commission resources, EU budget resources, sometimes national budget resources. But we need to use this multiplier, you need to use this technology to bring private resources most and above all. We are a patient financier, meaning that we have kind and nice shareholders that are patient enough, that are not waiting for dividends, and that allow us to generate resources and reinvest these resources. And that's precisely a key feature of EIB and our public policy banks, is that we can invest in long maturities. You have robust enough balance sheets to share risk. And by sharing risk with the private sector, we can turn projects that are simply too risky for the private sector, low risky enough so that the private sector take it. So that's how we approach the market. We are not here to replace the private sector. We are here to mobilize the private sector to share risks such that the residual risk is affordable for the private sector. And this is especially relevant for projects and for companies that operate in fast-growing sectors, so in technology sectors that have long implementation periods and that depend on market adoption. And sometimes market adoption takes quite substantial amount of time, meaning that they need a partner to share market and technology risk. And that's what we do. Through the various initiatives with the Commission, we are the EU bank. We work under the policy steering of the Commission and to benefit the European priorities. We have various initiatives. InvestEU is a key initiative, and we have demonstrated the abilities to support under InvestEU, in particular, the European policy goals. In many instances, we are complementary to other implementing partners, the national promotional banks and institutions. However, providing incentives to corporates for green investments remains key. We need to have the incentives in place. You need to have regulatory stability, and this is a very powerful incentive, but we need to have appropriate carbon pricing such that we internalize the cost of carbon, and this is another very powerful incentive. And we need to have the ecosystem of venture capital well financed such that the entrepreneurs in Europe feel that they can expand their business in Europe, they can scale up their business in Europe, and that Europe can become a big player in terms of the transition. In our investment survey, the share of firms that are investing in climate is increasing. Up to some years ago, we see that firms in US are investing more. Now we see European firms starting to catch up vis-a-vis the American investors, and this is key for preserving competitiveness. They have an appetite for investment, but of course, the macro environment is changing with interest rates first returning to, let's say, a normal or neutral monetary policy stance, and now going a bit above for inflation concerns to bring inflation back to the objective. At the same time, we are changing in terms of the funding conditions in the market. So risk aversion or lower risk appetite by market participants is now becoming a reality. And that's where we, as a public bank, can play a counter-cyclical role, step in when a private sector is starting to restrain. national and local governments and financiers must all seize this opportunity. This is a joint task by all the stakeholders in the market. We need to have the EU institutions, the national institutions, the regions, municipalities, citizens, banks, insurers, all working together and coordinated such that we can contribute to have a more secure and climate resilient and inclusive European economy. But we must not forget that this transition, of course, accelerates the industrial change, and this will render many jobs obsolete or requiring extensive retraining. The European economy is doing very well in what concerns the labor market thus far, meaning that we have seen a slowdown, but we see quite a substantial amount of jobs still being created or retained. Of course, that with a slowdown in the economy, we cannot expect this to continue for much longer. We need to be prepared to have some increase in unemployment. And when this occurs, we need to be prepared to reskill these workers. Otherwise, this unemployment will crystallize, and then we'll move from a low unemployment environment to a persistently high unemployment environment. And this will precisely creates the tensions that we don't need in order to move forward in the green transition. So this is a big challenge for regions that use extensively coal or that have energy intensive jobs. And we need to move into alternative industries or apply net zero technologies for the industries that exist today, thinking about cement, steel, chemicals, automotive. The latest EIB survey also shows a shortage of skilled labor as a major barrier for green investment. And this is particularly true for the corporate sector, but also for municipalities. Municipalities tell us, look, we'd like to do the green transition, but we don't have enough human resources that are skilled to do this transition. We need these people to do the transition in an efficient manner. So 62% of the municipalities report the availability of staff, of skilled staff as the main barrier. A new large-scale investment initiative is needed. We need to act now if we want to preserve competitiveness. And this includes, of course, regulation. This includes simplified and efficient state aid rules and includes more and better financing. So in face of the severe disruption that we have observed in global energy markets, Europe must scale up funding to support orderly transition and position itself among other industrial heavyweights in the new energy economy. But for this, we need common European tools to complement national policies. We cannot risk distorting the single market by using unequal state aid and state aid opportunities. So let me conclude by saying that if we accept the responsibility in steering this new industrial revolution, we need to accept the need to take more risky investments than other types of investments. And this means we need more and better capital markets financing. In Europe, the funding, as you know, is intermediated. So banks intermediate 80% of our funding. We speak for now quite more than a decade or almost a decade and a half about the capital markets union. We need definitely to move in this direction. We need to find the means to have a capital markets union such that, in particular, European firms can find a market that is large enough in terms of consumers, but also deep enough in terms of financing such that firms can meet and find the financing for risky investments they need in the EU market. So just to make it more tangible, in 2020, we have financed several vaccine enterprises, but of course that when you finance high-risk investments, not all of them are performing, and only one of them turned to be BioNTech. It was very successful, but to have one BioNTech, you need to look and you need to invest in 10 companies, and maybe 8 of them will do more or less well. There's one BioNTech and there's 1 or 2 that collapse because they choose the wrong technology. That's how risk is evolving in this venture capital market. And that's important that Europe changes the appetite vis-a-vis risk if you want, in fact, to bring this this type of investments, this type of companies, this type of evolution. We continue to be an important partner. We work with private investors, we work with fund managers, we work with banks. Instruments are designed to avoid crowding out private investment, as already alluded to. And what we can do is leverage on the expertise that we have and leverage on the private sector to allocate resources and screen the good projects. European Investment Funds, so our fund manager, plays a critical role, is a cornerstone investor in the European venture capital market. We invest 4 to 5 billion per year in equity, through intermediated equity, through funds of funds, but also 1 billion euros per year in venture debt, meaning debt products that are targeted to scale up companies and that can make the difference for these projects to prosper and to grow up. So we are facing this big challenge. It's a tremendous opportunity for investment, but also, of course, a tremendous challenge in what concerns having the appropriate skills and having a fair distribution. So thank you very much. I'll stop here and happy then for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, for this indeed excellent overview of what needs to be achieved from the economy side when it comes to our climate and environmental objectives, and also on the role of public investments, the EIB's role also, and the importance of leveraging, using also public investments to leverage private investments to channelize these investments into the right direction. And yeah, and a number of other specific points you mentioned, I took note of. I'm happy to come back to some of them afterwards. But I would now like to also welcome our next panelist, Geraldine Mahieu, Director for the Investment, Growth and Structural Reforms at Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs, European Commission. Thank you for joining us, and happy to hear from you on this topic.
So I'm not so sure we have such a debate because we are very much aligned, but let's see about maybe the future. So I have prepared some slides. So if I don't know if should I operate it myself? Okay, then which direction should we go? Right. No. No, is there someone else? Okay, you push. Okay, very good. All right. So many thanks for the invitation, and then for asking us our view. So in here, I'm going to also give the economic view because I'm from DG ECFIN, and we are of course looking at these challenges related to the green transition as very closely. So as you know, and we can start with the first slide. As you know, so we have the objective, we fixed for ourselves the objective of a net zero emission by 2050. So that we enshrine that in our European climate law. And the Fit for 55 package is basically the way to get there. So it's a framework to get there. So when we had discussed on how to do it, I mean, we have decided to have a mixed and a balance between, on the one hand, we have like regulation, but not only regulation, because regulation is usually better perceived by the public, by the citizens, but at the same time, economically, they can be quite costly. So we didn't want only regulation. So we had regulation, but also we had the pricing, which is the carbon pricing, which is our ETS, which is very powerful economically, but it's not alone, will not work, because then you don't manage to address the market failure and non-market barriers. So we had that. And then we have also some rules and also some support measures, such that the social climate fund. So that's our policy framework to deal with that. But from an economic point of view, I mean, the climate challenge is essentially an investment challenge. And I think that, Ricardo, you pointed out, indeed, and we've done some computation to try to see what are we talking about here. And without wanting to scaring anybody, the amount is huge, as you say. So basically, when we do our modeling, we try to first compute how much do we need for simply decarbonizing our energy system, which means we are just looking at the way we are going to produce this energy and just this, and we compare the amount, the additional investment we would need up to 2030, and we got to a number which is 475 billion per year up to 2030, so which is already very high, and that doesn't include, of course, the cost of, for example, of mitigating the cost for the vulnerable, and I'm going to talk about it later. And then more recently, because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we also looked at what are and our ambition has been just to increase the share of renewable and to also speed up this transition. And so we compute how much money, in additional money, we would need for reducing and phasing out the European reliance on fossil fuel, and then it's another 300 billion. If you add to that, also we looked at ways, and there has been new initiative, and you mentioned it, Ricardo, and we wanted to support our EU capacity to manufacture some of these key products, that are key for this net zero industry. And here we add another 92 billion. So you're already at a very, very high number, and that doesn't include the environmental aspects. So like if you add in addition all the investment that we think are needed for our environmental objectives, which are reducing pollution, waste, biodiversity, and so on, you add another 1 billion a year. So it's a huge amount of money that we need to find a way to finance. So the next slide. So you have some funding is available at the EU level, and one of them is the RRF. So which I'm pretty familiar with, where one of the key aspect of it was beyond the fact that it's a performance-related instrument, meaning that you only get money if you deliver what you have promised on the ground. There was an obligation of member states to at least invest 37% of their plans in the green transition, and not only in greening, meaning just light green, where you change a light bubble and it's considered to be a green investment. We also significantly just improve and make more demanding on the way how we qualify what is a green investment. We had a clear methodology there, so to make sure that any of the investment is actually very green. And this same methodology was then used also in cohesion, so that we have really uplift our game in Europe and be much more demanding of what type of investment we consider that are good and green. We have also in this facility added this do no significant harm principle, which is extremely binding. It's an eligibility criteria, and that makes sure that even if the investment is not green, they don't harm the green transition, which was a very important element. And here you have a large amount of financing. So in current term, you have 725 billion that was available. And if you look at how much we have so far, the member states have planned, and that's the next slide, you can see that member states went above what the 37% that was required. We are about at 40% for the moment, and it's only on the plans that have been approved so far. So which is already a lot of money. It corresponds to about 200 billion of funding that will go to the green transition. And if you add also the ones that are not considered to be climate but are environmental, you had 43%. So it's a large really part of the investment that are addressing the green transition, and that's without taking into account the repower that you also mentioned. So we have added 20 billion in terms of money coming from the financing from ETS. We have had also the possibility to transfer fund from the BAR, which was the Brexit Adjustment Fund, where many member states have not used it, so another 2 billion. So if you add all these plus the new loans that have been asked by the member state, about another 120. So you add about 150 billion to the 200 billion. So on terms of green investment. So this is more substantial, but in comparison to the need, maybe it's not. So if you go to the next slide. we can see also where we are in terms of the implementation. So as you know, as I just mentioned, the RF, Recovery and Resilience Facility, works in terms of performance. So that means that member state only gets the money when they meet the milestones and target. So these are the key steps in the implementation, and only get them the money when they have done it. So, and in total, we have more than 6,000 milestones and targets that we have to monitor, just to say how much work we have to do as well, and the member state as well. But out of this, you have like 2,600 of them and a bit more that are related to the green transition. So it's a third of them are really related. So that shows the importance of this aspect in our program. And also so far we have here you and you see it better here because I thought that this is quite small, but you can see here on the bars, the one that are the dark green shows the one that are fulfilled, and it's 300 of them. But you have also all the ones that are declared by the member state are completed, but we have not yet assessed them. And so you had another 1,300 of them. So progress is happening. So then, and that's quite good. Of course, some say that we have done some slowdown in the amount of fund that we have disbursed, which is true in a certain way. At the same time, I think we really believe that we will catch up by the end of the year, and you will see that. And why there was some slowdown, it's also because member states had the possibility to revise their plan, to add their repower chapter, to modify their plan, and so they have basically focused on this revision of the plans because they needed to get this by the end of the year, because otherwise they lose the money. And so that has been the focus on all member states, but that doesn't mean that the implementation has stopped on the ground. And basically what we are seeing now is that all teams are on the deck to revise all their plans, but at the same time, as soon as the plan is adopted, the member states submit their payment request because they have done all the work, but they just needed one thing to sort it, or a change in their plans to allow for the payment request. So we're pretty sure that we will reach the 200 billion disbursement at the end of the year for the RF, which is quite good. So if you look in terms of what we finance, and that's the next slide, you can see already, so a large of the amount on the left-hand side, you see the fulfill measure so far. So that's the 300 and what is the share. And you can see a large part of this is in energy efficiency. So meaning improvement of building, or building new buildings that are more efficient from an energy point of view, sustainable mobility, a lot in particular on, for example, the rail has been largely financed. You have also renovation, but also all other sort of project. And here, just to give you two examples, one for example, in France, where we have basically financed, and it has been done now, 20,000 new social units, so that will with renovated or new buildings, which basically just achieve this reduction in the emission by at least 30%, and that's already done. We have also done a lot, as I mentioned, on sustainable mobility, and for example, an example in Austria, where basically we have financed they have introduced a system of tickets for climate, where it's incentivized the use of public transportation. But these are two concrete examples to do, but you have plenty of them, and we have also published our recent annual report. You can see a lot of information of what we are financing so far. So now if you go for the next, at the next slide, so that I mentioned, so the first way we can help the transition is to finance with public money, these investments. But we are also at policy-wise, and this is where we really cross each other, Ricardo and myself, is that indeed, so we are also doing through InvestEU, that is implemented by the EIB, but also by some national promotional bank. We are trying to de-risk some of these investments, and there is a crucial role to be played there. So we have financed through InvestEU a lot of this project, and through the repower, we have added additional financing to that, to allow for additional support from the EIB. And outside of this, so this is an important point to mention as well, in our discussion about, so we know it's very important, this green transition, and then in the discussion on economic governance review, so this is the change in the fiscal and stability and growth pact that we are discussing among ministers. One of the key aspects was to make sure that we incentivize enough the public investment, and in particular the green. That was an aspect that was clearly mentioned. And another thing where we are discussing with the Ministry of Finance in particular is also on how to make the budget greener. So there are also discussion there, and that's what we can do at policy level. Next slide, please. outside of this, of course, whatever we do at public level, I mean, will never be enough to finance it, and so the key part needs to be financed from the private sector. So that's clear, and that's why we are trying to incentivize that is through creating a regulatory framework that help to incentivize this private investment. And as I mentioned, it's a Fit for 55, in particular these ETS, where we believe that this is the price signal, and then the fact that we build some expectation about what the price will be, and that incentivize then the private sector to invest in the technology that will allow for the reduction of these emissions, and that's a critical role to play. Outside of this, there are of course challenges, and one of them, I think you mentioned it as well. So at this juncture, I mean, private investment is being more difficult because of the increasing interest rate, and also in the geopolitical situation, which is make it more difficult. But it's also more difficult from public policy point of view, in the sense that with the increase in the interest rate, the uncertainty, there are many competing demands for the funds. And so that becomes a challenge also for the public sector to know, because you need to finance for the defense, you need to finance for your aging, and you need to finance to protect the household and the firm against the increase in the price. And at the same time, you need to finance the green transition. So that complicates the matter. So the environment is complicated from to also support the private sector. And the other key issue and key challenge for the private sector is, of course, the environmental that needs to be facilitating these investment, and to try to remove the bottleneck to these investment, and in particular the permitting, where we have quite worked on. If you look at the next slide, so what I wanted to mention is also that outside of this challenge related to investment, so when we look at an economic point of view, this green transition is important because we need to foster this investment, but it's also raised a number of challenges from just on the economy. And one of them is, I mentioned, this transformation of our economy, and I think you mentioned it as well. So even when we have modeled in the Commission where we show what is the impact of the green transition on the GDP, and generally the impact is okay in the medium term. It's not that big at aggregate level. The problem is that it's below the aggregate. You have in sectors, some sector will suffer a lot, and while others will gain, like renewable will suffer, fossil fuel industry will gain. So we have like challenge here to ensure support to the industry that will suffer, and incentivize them to change their business model. And at the same time, we have this distributional aspect that are also very key, where clearly the poorer household will have much more difficulty in financing their renovation, in getting access to finance, and this is something that we need to take into account. Then you have the financial constraint, which is another important challenge due to the increase in interest rate, but also because our market are not, I mean, the capital market unit is completed, so the access to finance, particularly for the SMEs, is difficult. They rely essentially on the banking sector and also the bank, and they should be able to access the rest of the funding, and that's clearly an issue. The skills shortage, you mentioned it as well, so that's also something where the Commission has also acted upon with this European Year of the Skills, and we have indeed incentivized and pushed for the reskilling and upskilling of the workforce. We see that there are indeed shortages in the market, and in particular on the green and digital aspect of it, even though this is not the only one, but it clearly it's a challenge. And then the access to the raw material is also another of these aspects. And on this, and that's why we have come out with the European Green Deal Industrial Plan, where basically we try to address all of these aspects, or at least partly. So by trying to simplify the regulatory environment, so facilitating the investment, by addressing the skills gap, by also flexibilize a bit our state aid regime, so to help to some extent the public, to help the private sector, and also by strengthening the trade supply chain, by working internationally to try to get enough of these raw materials. So as a conclusion, I would say, so this green transition is clearly an environmental challenge, but it's as much an environmental challenge as an economic challenge in a certain way. And we need to make sure that we incentivize the investment where they are, and that we support the transition with public funding. At the same time, we need to make sure that in doing so that our economy remain competitive. This is also a point that you clearly mentioned, and to make sure that this is, as you say, so just and fair. And why? Because it needs to be acceptable and supported by all. And I think it's going to be the main challenge of the coming year. Now that we have all our packages in place and our rules in place, it's clear that now the citizens are, and the firm are realizing that it's very costly, this transition and so making sure that we continue to have the support of our decision and our firm to invest in this transition, especially when you are in a situation where maybe not all international partners are playing ball. This may become increasingly difficult, and so I think it's a challenge for this commission, but probably for the next one. And I will stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. I think indeed it's not necessarily that there is a heated discussion. It's more also that we come from different perspectives and angles, and we hear and complement each other. And I think there was quite a lot of points that were also echoing what Ricardo said about the importance of public investments, and also what you explained about the recovery funds, very important, leveraging again private investments, but the importance also what you mentioned is very interesting about the regulatory framework, that having a right regulatory framework on its own can help facilitate channelize the investments into the right direction, and importance of bearing in mind the competition aspects, just transition you said, and in a ever increasing, let's say, more competitive global environment. Among other points you mentioned, but it's also good to see that the investment gap that we had to reach the interim target by 2030 is decreasing. Of course, the point is indeed to ensure that we meet these targets, and also to ensure that we meet our targets after 2030. So thank you. And I would like to also now give the floor to Janez Potočnik, co-chair of the International Resource Panel and a former European Commissioner for the Environment. So happy to hear your introductory reflections. Also, if you have anything ready to also respond to what you heard thus far from me.
Thank you, Stefan. And science and research. I was Commissioner for Science and Research also, because today it will be more about science and research than actually the environment. And by the way, just to say that it will not, I will enlighten you the story from a different angle, but I'm also professor of economics, just that you won't think that I'm not economist. So since this one, it's not working, I will go with this. So the first thing which I would like to share with you is where we are actually going. I'm co-chairing now this International Resource Panel, which is basically UNEP sister organization to IPCC or IPBS, and we are dealing with natural resource management, which is actually central question to economics, by the way. So where we are heading, this is actually the structure of the biomass of life. You see there on the bottom are actually humans. So that's how much humans in this biomass of animals actually are represented. But if we add to that, then the rest of biomass of life, so from bacteria, fungi, plants, and so on, we see that practically this biomass of animals, it's relatively small. But actually, that's not my point. If you would compare the biomass of life, so all biomass on the planet Earth, with anthropogenic mass created by us humans, we are already surpassing the biomass. So that's about concrete, bricks, aggregates, metals. And if we look to the trends are telling us that 2040, the right column will be triple size of the left column. That's where we are. So when we talk about natural resources in the International Resource Panel, what we actually talk about? Biomass, metals, fossil fuels, and non-metallic minerals, and we call that all materials. So everything extracted from Earth are materials, including fossil fuels. They are part of that analysis. And on the top of that, you have also water and land. All that is natural resources. When we look to the trends in the last 50 plus years, we can find out that global material use has almost by factor of 4, it's between 3 and 4 increased. And this is due to mainly urbanization, of course, and of course industrialization, but also due to the population growth. You will see how different it is region by region. But when we look to the structure, you can see that actually the non-metallic minerals are very much increasing in structure. Why? Because China and the others are building the cities, infrastructure, and so on. And that's why this part is actually skyrocketing. So this is in particularly interesting because this is material footprint analyzed by different regions. So that's actually the use of materials, including trade aspects, so import, export. What we can see for the last 20 years or so, Europe and North America net effect, we haven't increased material footprint, but it's true that our footprint is much higher per capita than of the others. Yeah, so the baseline, it's very high. But you can see that actually affluence is actually economic growth. It's in Europe and in North America, it's the important factor on the side which is negative, and positive is technological development, which is basically balancing that. But if you look to the rest of the groups, so next one is Africa, West Asia, where you can see that basically all it's happening practically on the population growth. Not a lot on economic growth, but not a lot, it's also compensated by technological development. And finally, if you look to the Asia and Pacific, which is the biggest area here, and ACCA, which is actually Eastern Europe, its majority is affluence, vast majority is economic growth of those impacts which are happening. And if you put that together, then for the world, you get the picture that technology is actually minor factor. It's improving 5% only, population growth 27%, and economic growth 40%. So in all the impacts of material story, you see that economic story, it's 2/3, and population growth, it's approximately 1/3 on a global level, but it's totally different when you look to the regions. So if we then look to what are the effects of extraction and processing of natural resources on the triple planetary crisis? Our conclusions are pretty simple. 60% of global climate change impacts, including land use change, can be connected to that. More than 40% of air pollution health impacts, and more than 90% of water stress and global land-related and water eutrophication. So it's biodiversity land-related. It's not all factors of biodiversity which are impacting that, but it's connected to specific factor. And here at the end, you have value added created and workforce which is employed. So you have practically on one slide the whole story of where we are and what is our major problem. So if I go, then if trends would continue, global material consumption is predicted almost to double by 2060. And that's why our core message is that the economic growth and well-being growth actually should decouple from resource use, and both should decouple from environmental impacts, or we will hit the walls. And this is pretty much straightforward. It's no big science. So what is important to keep in mind if we go from problems to solutions? Actually, by the way, all the figures I was explaining to you now are from the incoming report, which will be released 2024 UNIA. So it will be Global Resource Outlook 2024. And what is important, we have entirely shifted from looking to maximizing products and services on the markets to maximizing human needs, because we are very much aware that we don't need cars, we need mobility, we don't need light bulbs, we need light, you don't need chair to sit there, but you need to sit. We don't need refrigerators, we need chilled and healthy food. We don't need CDs, we need to listen to the music. We don't need pesticides, we want healthy plants. So it's very much about dematerialization. It's very much about rethinking ownership, which is in many cases a serious problem. And it's very much about adding sufficiency to the efficiency story. And so we have actually put provisioning systems, which is meeting human needs in the center. We are looking how much of natural resources are needed and how can we meet then the human needs. So one thing which is many times not clear enough. So when we talk about the demand side insufficiency, by the way, we don't talk enough about demand side anyway. We talk predominantly about cleaning the supply side. So we can reduce demand of energy and materials in two ways, through consumption or through production. Through consumption, it's pretty straightforward. Anything what we will consume less, of course, it has an impact. But also, if we have the same needs fulfilled, you can meet them with using much less energy and with using much less materials. So it's absolutely possible. The current system which we have, it's simply not stimulating resource. It's stimulating resource-intensive use, not the opposite. I will explain you later on. So the core question which we're asking is this one: how to meet human needs in least energy and material intensive way. So I will focus only on, I could talk lengthy, believe me, about this economics and how the things are interrelated, but I will focus only on three important messages which I think we should keep in mind. One is confusing market signals. So normally we are measuring our well-being in GDP. Actually, we measure economic activity as a well-being, but it's actually not well-being. Well-being, it's more than that. But this is a kind of inclusive wealth, which is one of the measures of the well-being, which has three components. One is the gray dotted line is actually the production capital per capita. And the gray solid line is GDP per capita. So they are pretty much the synonyms when you look in these 20 years of the development. Then the blue dotted line is human capital per capita, which in these 20 years was pretty much stand still. It increased for 8%. But if you look to natural capital per capita, it was actually decreasing for almost 40%. So a kind of conclusion that a lot of GDP growth in last decades was achieved on the depletion of natural capital. It's frankly not so difficult to reach. So if I do a bit of disgrace to my profession, economics, because this will be really simplified. So, you know, what is common mantra in economics? It's market signals which are driving our behavior, producers and consumers, and mainly it's price which is behind that. And anybody who is working in the business knows that pretty well. So, but if we simplify previous story and if I translate it, so we have actually production capital overvalued and over-rewarded, human capital undervalued, under-rewarded, and natural capital, unfortunately, in many cases, not valued at all. So if we think that, that from that we will get economic, social, and environmental balance, wake up. So core thing is what are the signals which we are sending to producers and consumers. So current market signals simply do not incentivize sustainable resource use. In fact, just the opposite. So if I compare it for environment, for this environmental, if you would go as a consumer to shopping center, take the things which you need, not pay them, shopping center will get bankrupt. And the same, it's pretty much happening with environment. We go there, we use it, it's getting bankrupt, but unfortunately with consequences on us humans. Our short-term rational behavior, it's leading to long-term irrational. This is the title of Arto Pasolini novel, Charming Mass Suicide. That's why ambitious policies, we are today talking about European Green Deal, face an uphill battle to implement incentives and regulations to change the production and consumption patterns. So what we actually do is sending market signals in one direction, and then you in Commission are sending with regulation and everything, consumers and producers in different direction, in acting more responsibly. And the final result, it's a lot of lobbying on the markets because it goes against the interest of industry. It's common sense. So it's, and I think it's final time that we stop signaling to producers that destroying natural capital is free of charge. And we simply can't be so naive to ask consumers, you have to act more responsibly and ask them to pay double price, because this will not work. So it's like if I would be economic professor, I would say, come on guys, you have to act stupid, because otherwise you will not meet the requirements actually of there. So this is the last slide from this consuming market signals. I call it global hypocrisy indicator. So when were actually the fossil fuel subsidies the highest according to IMF? Last year. Can somebody believe that? But yeah, that's the fact of reality. The second thing, and I will be shorter here, it's cost related to past mistakes are unavoidable. So what it's actually today already in the giant leap scenario, which is very good modeling of the Earth for all, it's basically even in the giant leap scenario, which means the fastest economic transformation in history, we will land at 2 degrees Celsius. So 1.5 is passé. And this brings serious consequences for societies, including extreme weather events, heat waves, flooding, droughts, and food security. By the way, this summer in Slovenia, you should see it. There was almost no single day without a storm, without a strong wind, or without a flooding. And the consequence is that today costs for budget are a few percent of budget, which will have to be paid. And by the way, you will be next year having that on your table, how to treat those things. My point is we have breached the level where there will be no costs. And costs will come because we haven't really acted in the past. And that's why the most important in the things which you talk about, for the least developed part of the world, adaptation, it's more important than prevention, because they are not guilty ones, but they are getting most of the portion. For us, still prevention is the most important. But here you can talk about costs and investments and this balance. But the real question is, what we have seen in Slovenia at that moment was a huge amount of solidarity coming from all the citizens and also from European Union. So van der Leyen was also in Slovenia, also was the president of the council. And they were all offering the help. But why the hell we are ready to be solid, to show the solidarity only ex post, but when it comes to ex ante, we are not ready to do that. So that's the second question. And the last thing which I would like to just put your attention for that is this one. According to recent research, the natural inclination of wealth in our economic system is to flow upward. Richer will get more richer. I'm not saying that poorer will get more poorer, but the difference before the rich and poor will increase. So it's only redistribution that sets limits to inequality in a system as we have, which is pretty much an interesting conclusion also from this giant leap scenario, which is basically saying that the social tipping points will be reached before environmental tipping points. So if you want seriously to deal with environmental story, you have to deal it simultaneously with social, because something which is not acceptable, it's simply not acceptable. And you can be whatever politician you want, you can have whatever power you want, it's not acceptable. So you have to create conditions that this is acceptable. So there are actually 6 solutions which we are proposing in the GROW. Institutionalize resource governance and define resource use path on all the levels from cities to the global level. This means also targets. Redirect finance to serve the transition, which we have heard a lot today already. Make trade an engine of sustainable development, which we have also heard a lot. Then create low carbon, clean and circular business model, which again we have heard. Correct market signals to mainstream sustainable production and consumption, and finally focus attention on the most resource intensive provisioning system, which are actually mobility, housing, food system, daily functional needs of people. We will very likely we are in the final ways of putting together something as a system transformation hub, Metabolic World Resource Institute, Systemic, Climate Kicking, the Club of Rome, where we would really start looking into the matters of this systemic nature, which are basically very much currently missing from the agenda, which leads me to the conclusion. For sustainable future, some basic shifts are needed. We simply need to move from economy where humans are in function of economic success to an economy where economy is in function of meeting human needs, which will lead us to different kind of solutions as today. So setting the order right. Second, one of the core problems of economy, contemporary economics, science, it's today that it's treating us humans as superior and external to nature, which is a mistake. We are part of nature. Destroying nature is simply destroying ourselves. Third, we need to move from extraction-based production to a creation-based production, so we should stop stimulating extraction-based economic success and reward responsible, innovative, creative ways of meeting human needs. We should move from an egoistic, short-term based interest governance structures and logic to cooperation and sharing sovereignty. We are the first generation ever on the planet which is living in socio-ecological space of planetary scope. We are interconnected, interdependent, and we will fail or rise together. So some are saying that this is not in the interest of the business sector, but let us look to this. This is the World Economic Forum based survey which was done among the business leaders. This is this year publication. So if you look to the 10 years perspective, which is the number one top risk? Future to mitigate climate change. Number two, future of climate change adaptation. Number three, natural disasters and extreme weather events. Number four, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. Number six, natural resource crisis. Is that possible? It is possible, yeah. So sometimes also those, including me, I was very heavily in that, in the policy lead, do not simply listen to the voices of those who are in troubles more than to the voices of those who are innovative and are aware of the challenges we are facing. So taking painkillers to remove the acute pain will not heal the chronic diseases, rather make them worse. So changing our relationship with the rest of nature, it's ultimately not only environmental, but also economic equity, security imperative to strengthen collective resilience. It could only be resolved in two ways. One is with immediate collective action, cooperation, or in a hard and painful way, which is unfortunately already very much happening. And all the things like you see, conflicts, pandemics, migration, are to a large extent part of that story too. So the future will be green or there will be no future. And this is the last slide. I will finish in my former country, ex-Yugoslavia. We had a super comics which was called Alan Ford, and it was published all over the place, and we were all reading it. And it's very nicely explaining what is actually the problem of today's economic system. It's not the problem to drive without the brakes. The problem is to stop. So yeah, the problem is to stop, and we will have to take that into account. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janez, for your reflections on the challenges we are facing. And I mean, a lot of points. It's impossible to summarize it, include all of them, but indeed the importance of decoupling our growth from material consumption, and importance of also for policymakers to send the right signals to the market to actually help us achieve the green transition. I would highlight these, notwithstanding many other points that you mentioned, and that we can't just in a way ignore, that the historical problems that were like since the 70s, that we are in a way paying the price for inaction also, but we need to make sure that we now try to avoid the cost of inaction. I would say up until especially until 2050. And also what you're saying about signals, in a way I would relate it to also the question around proper public investment, but also metrics, taxonomy as well, what was already mentioned by Geraldine and Ricardo. Now I would like to just invite our respondents to provide very quick, short reactions to what they heard from the panelists. And I would like to give the floor first to Lina Konstantinopoulou, Policy Director from Eurochambres, or from the business sector, to hear how does what you heard from the panelists, how does this sound from your perspective, please?
Yes, I think it works now. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I think we have heard quite a lot about the needs for financing, both at the public and also at the private level. But I think I would like to a bit share our thoughts. The Eurochambres is representing 43 national chambers of commerce. And within our membership, we are also including, let's say, the grassroots economy, the local and the regional chambers of commerce. So indeed, we agree there is a gap that needs to be done to meet our net zero targets and the investments that have been committed. A lot of different types of numbers we see on what type of investments we need. You pointed out, Geraldine, some of the numbers. I just took here the numbers that the GRC pointed out. They gave 620 billion to finance the climate and energy transition, 92 billion to comply with the Net Zero Industry Act, and another 120 billion to fuel the digital transition, because we also need also the digital transition to couple it. So that's why, of course, unlocking investments is one of the topest priorities. But where do we stand? This year, we launched the results of our own, let's say, economic forecast, which identified the main challenges and expectations. This was based on 43,000 respondents, entrepreneurs mainly from 27 European countries. And all of them highlighted high costs of energy, raw materials and labor, as well as skill shortages and regulatory burden. So this, some of also the numbers that we had there also underlined also low levels of confidence, investment, especially in growth prospects. So, but still the challenges are not there over. So aside these challenges that we see for 2024, we are looking on, we are exposed to a high number of significant new policy initiatives and legislative proposals, and of course, the whole impact of the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package. But at the same time, businesses are still struggling. And when I say businesses, I'm really talking about small SMEs who are struggling to keep pace with emerging new requirements, notably from the corporate sustainability environment, the corporate due diligence environment, taxonomy, and other regulations that are impacting them directly or indirectly in the value chain. You mentioned quite a lot the whole public intervention, the instruments for public intervention. Of course, the Recovery and Resilience Funds, we were among the ones who were very much involved, but at the same time, we are getting some signals from our local and regional chambers that the absorption rate is not as it should be. We are very much worried that this funding will not be used properly but also at the grassroots level. And we are more than happy also to share our numbers that came out from our chambers. Another very important element, because you, aside the instruments of public intervention, you also pointed out the instruments for private intervention. There, I want to share the latest results that we have finalized with another organization, SME United, on sustainable finance. We got feedback from 2,100 companies. So there, the results are a bit also worrisome, 60% or even positive also at some points of times. So 60% of SMEs have invested in sustainability objectives during the past 20 years. and only 35% of them are using external finance, and only 16 of them, of this external finance, can be classified as sustainable finance, and dominated by grants, loan subsidies, and guarantees. So, of course, this will not be sufficient if we want to finance this enormous amount of investments for SMEs transition. We gave some recommendations in this sustainable finance survey that it's important to have a simple sustainability reporting standard, especially for SMEs, that can also counterbalance any trickle-down effect and provide banks with crucial data, especially for loan appraisals. We discussed also about the regulatory standards for sustainable SME loans, encouraging major investments with favorable financing, for example, the green asset ratios that requires reconsideration. But also optimizing state subsidy programs, while that require and remain crucial for us, the SMEs, but also the design and delivery needs more to be streamlined. But this is more on the monetization of investment, and you tackled upon the issues of green skills and green jobs, which are instrumental in translating these opportunities. Chambers, of course, have a dual role. They represent the users for these green skills and these green jobs, but they also are service providers. We are at the moment training millions of entrepreneurs, millions of SMEs in this green transition. And we are also seeing that continuous vocational education training is a must if we really need to move towards the green skills. Another very important element, and this is my last point, is because we touched upon competitiveness, it is really important to discuss about decentralization. We need to keep European companies in EU. We are looking on a fierce competition across the continent, China, the US, and especially the whole ERA. Is, of course, a big, large-scale investment incentive, but at the same time, Net Zero Industry Act is only a first step for us. We really need to find ways to streamline permitting procedures. We need to also find ways of implementing very fast these industrial projects. And finally, to do that, because we're discussing about partnerships and trade agreements, I think it's important to aim for development of global partnerships. We need to connect with other emission trading systems, and we need to streamline international agreements, particularly in standardization of CO2 calculation methods. So that's just my final point on your interventions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lina, for your reactions. And I would then give the floor to Sam van den Plas, Policy Director from Carbon Market Watch, for your reflections from the civil society perspective.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Just to add a couple of thoughts, and I think it's really encouraging to hear sustainable prosperity and being at the heart of what we're discussing here, how to turn economics into an ally of the green transition. I agree with a lot of what will help or either hinder success of the European Union will have to do with how companies and industrial ecosystems are able to excel relative to international competitors. So on your point on competitiveness, yes, but it needs to be a transition towards sustainable development and climate neutrality at the core of that. Mr. Potočnik, you make it difficult as an NGO to come after you, because I mean, thank you for sharing the food for thought and outlining the challenge we're facing so eloquently and with a lot of important examples. I was struck earlier this week by the United Nations Environmental Programme, their latest report on the gap between what is required to the current pace of greenhouse gas emissions and what is required to keep global warming at safe levels. The cover image has and the title of the report as well, is a broken record. And this does not only refer to the temperature records which are broken, but I think also some level of impatience from the UN Environment Programme, that they start to sound like a broken record in giving their warnings, and still the world fails to cut carbon pollution to safe levels. I want to come in with some specificities, and as Carbon Market Watch, climate policies and carbon pricing policies are close to our heart. The critical role of carbon pricing was mentioned by the European Commission, and how the European emissions trading system can help to deliver some of those goals. And I think it's a good example of where carbon pricing and specifically ETS auctioning revenues can be used to invest in further emission reductions. You create a virtuous cycle in your economy. And more concretely, I mean, the EU has had the carbon market for 15 years right now, with rising carbon prices currently. Last year, almost 40 billion euros in revenues was generated through the auctioning of emission allowances. This will be complemented by the Social Climate Fund once the emissions trading system gets expanded to transport and building sector, and that fund will offer another 65 billion euros in the period it operates, plus 25% member state funding. And this is where your revenues can, I mean, you create a double dividend, because you're not just pricing the pollution, but you use the revenues to invest in the solutions. But I can't help but noticing we're not there yet. There is a big risk from our perspective that some of what we are doing when it comes to carbon pricing still undermines these long-term goals. And from our perspective, aiming for climate neutrality by 2040 instead of 2050 is preferable and more in line with what is necessary. On the ETS auctioning revenues, while we raise these funds in the European Union, in the current decade between 2021 and 2030, about 5 billion emission allowances will be handed out for free to energy-intensive sectors in the steel, cement, the chemical sector. The monetary value, if you count this at an 80 euro per ton carbon price, is around 400 billion euros. The way these free emission allowances are allocated, it fundamentally undermines the efficient resource use. I mean, steel sectors are not encouraged to recycle their steel. Hydrogen is not permitted to have a same treatment. The same for the cement sector, where lower clinker alternatives are available, and they are not supported by this market. So there is a need to do more, I think, especially when you talk about the main notion of backlash to climate policies. The European Union is now extending its carbon pricing system to transport and buildings. So citizens at the end of the month will pay for their carbon pollution when they drive their cars, when they heat their homes. And at the same time, we're providing an indirect pollution subsidy up to 400 billion euros towards industrial sectors. There's an inherent unfairness there. We can debate, I guess, whether that's a subsidy, how direct or how indirect that is. At least it's not internalizing the external cost of the pollution. And I think in an economic fora as this one, this does define as a market failure. Another one, I can't help mentioning it, specifically to the functioning of the modernization fund, which is governed by the European Investment Bank. And this also generates, is raised through the auctioning of emission allowances. There's around 48 billion will be available between 2021 and 2030 to help modernize the lower income member states, to help them to modernize their energy system. And this is very much needed. There is also, in some cases, some inefficient spending, to say the least, there, specifically in countries like the Czech Republic, Romania, Slovakia, Croatia, Poland. We work with Bankwatch and NGO active in those countries and see around 1 billion euros being allocated to projects running on fossil gas. I mean, this is primarily coal to gas conversions for combined power and heat stations, but also gas pipeline in Romania, power plants and industrial uses. Here, I think more needs to be done, because this is not Paris aligned. This is assets we invest in today, which will be operating for another 30 to 40 years. So more needs to be done there to improve that. So this is to add to some of the food for thought. I look forward to the further exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam, for your reactions. I received a couple of questions from online participants. I'm just wondering if we maybe have any questions from the audience in the room. If you do, I will take all of them together and then ask the panelists for the responses and their concluding remarks, bearing in mind we don't have a lot of time, but it was very interesting listening to you, and I think very interesting also arguments and data you put forward that I think we all benefited from that. So going back to the audience in the room, I wonder if you have any immediate questions. Yeah, we have one. If you have others, I will take them all together and then go back to the panel so we can slowly wrap up. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Andres Torek, I work for the EIB. I would have a question to the former commissioner. 10, 12 years ago, we've been quite far ahead with the beyond GDP debate. Now, F2C died last year, so we have not lived up to that. How come that, given the severity of the climate shock or the climate development, we're not ahead? I mean, what is your view on this? Why did it not happen? Because we had two presentations, very kind of classic on the investment needs that are attached to this, true, but you could, exactly as you point out in some of the issues, and ETS carbon pricing goes into the same line, you sort of set the regulatory framework for that. So, I mean, the Commission, last comment, I know we have little time, the Commission this year tried to have a very modest approach when its annual foresight report, they introduced this kind of qualified GDP attached or modified for the healthy life expectancy, to kind of introduce the idea of a not just GDP as such, but a qualified GDP. But it strikes me that we haven't seen, or in my view, we have seen little progress over the last 10, 12 years. Thank you.
Very much. Yes, there is one more question.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Peter Bocek. I'm with the chemical industry in Brussels. And my impression is we are a little bit in a bubble here, because when I look at the latest election in the Netherlands, also at global developments, our laudable efforts towards transitioning the economy, that is not really maybe we have lost the public to some extent. We also should be honest that a lot of the global resource issues and climate issues will not be resolved in Europe. We are really a fraction of the global emissions. We are a fraction of the global resource use. When we look at the fact that China is the biggest steel producer, the biggest chemicals producer, the biggest cement producer worldwide, that is where you find the resources are going. And so we need to look, or we need to be honest also that the overall consumption of energy, of resources, has to do with global growth, population growth. And that is something Janez didn't really mention that much. Yeah, you did, but that is the fundamental thing people try to avoid. People try to avoid, and the global wealth development is something that is also understandable, because people want to have a proper house, a roof over their head, and they want to have more than one light bulb. And so that is explaining a lot of the dynamics that we see. And what we also see in Europe is that people seem to be less ready to accept rules, how they consume, what car they are supposed to drive, what they eat, to where they may or may not travel. So that is also a development we can see. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if it's yes, one short question, because yes.
Just following up on the global perspective, what type of conversations do you envisage for the COP28 regarding the economics of sustainable prosperity? Do you think that this type of topics are also going to be addressed?
Thank you. I think we can now also close the questions and go back to the panel and a number of questions. There are comments as well. I would first ask Ricardo if you have any generally, if you respond to also what the other speakers said and any particular questions. There was one question about the role of stock market in supporting, undermining the green transition. I would connect it with a say more broader question on, you mentioned the counter-cyclic role of the EIB. And I'm just wondering if you have any additional points to make based on the experience thus far. What are the challenges and what more needs to be done? For example, so you can fulfill this role in this say counter-cyclic counter-cyclic efforts to actually ensure that our economy is supports the green transition. And there is this, let's say, smaller also question on a particular question on the stock markets. This is of course also be let's say a chance for a final conclusions, reflections from your side on what you heard, and if you want to respond to anything else, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. I think it was a very interesting discussion, and there's a lot of food for thought. We can spend the next few hours or days here discussing the huge amount of issues that was raised in this discussion. Going directly maybe to the issue of the stock market. Like the green financial market is in the making, is developing. EIB launched the green bond back in 2008. It was a while ago, and the market is now $1 trillion. The green bond market, out of a market of bonds that is 100 trillion, so it's still 1%. There's a large room and margin to grow. When it comes to the stock market, the disclosures are important parts, and the listed companies are now compulsory obliged to disclose a number of indicators, and that this will allow investors, when they build their portfolios, to take into account the carbon footprint of each of the companies they invest in. Well, is that enough? I think it's definitely a very important part of the stock market, having more information, transparency. Of course, that the development of the market with better information, we can put in place incentives and regulation that push forward this trend. I think that's the important part. In the same vein, I think that in Europe, when I speak about capital market union, it has many dimensions, but the fact that we don't have a dynamic IPO market in Europe also leads some of our companies in the green and in the digital sectors to move to United States or to Asia. I think we need to look and to act promptly on the capital markets union. The idea, I don't think, should be that European companies stay in Europe, but that European companies stay in Europe if they want to, because what they're doing now is kicking them out for them to search for funding elsewhere. They are not going to US or to Asia because they want to go. They go there because they don't have the funding they need in Europe. We are putting up this European Tech Champion initiative, which I think it was a great initiative by the bank, by the Commission, and by a number of countries. On the counter-cyclical role, I think that the counter-cyclical role of EIB was very clear, in particular during the COVID crisis, where the EGF played a very prominent role in keeping liquidity flowing in the market, allowing companies that were during shutdown heavily affected to have the liquidity needed to remain open. And this was one of the cornerstones of this remarkable job retention that we're creating during COVID time, and that's one of the reasons why I don't have a massive job destruction. So now we are in a situation where the economy is slowing down, going into recession in some parts of Europe. So we need to think about how to focus our resources to be counter-cyclical, and the EIB is focused on that. We have the resources. We can play a counter-cyclical role, but we need good projects. And that's what we need to have for this period. We need to have good projects such that the funding can still flow and flow for the good projects. We cannot expect the counter-cyclical role is not to finance everything just for sake of throwing money in the economy. That's not the way to go. And we need, of course, to have good projects, and RRF was a very important instrument. The transition will go to 2050. We need to think how to coordinate European economies and member states after RRF to keep this drive towards the net zero by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you. Janez, there were a couple of questions also towards you. So on the GDP, also on the high resources cost, the reference also mentioned by Lina, and a couple of reflections also coming from the audience on what needs to be done. And I would say also, let's say, the trade-offs that we need to consider, short, medium-term trade-offs that we need to also be mindful of when we are trying to decouple our economic development from resource consumption and achieving the green transition in a nutshell. So happy to hear from you on any additional reflections you might have.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe starting with the COP, because this is the shortest. I have no high expectations from COP nor from COPs. They are moving things, but too slowly, too short. And one thing which is problematic is that they are pretty much focusing on the supply side, on energy only. And with that, we are pretty much losing the global south in discussion. Because if we don't put also the demand and who is actually crossing planetary boundaries, who is actually consuming the products, we will have hard times. Then at the end of the day, you will have loss and damage. We will pay more and more money, and that will be the way to go, but not really solving the climate story. So I think there will be a serious rethinking. But the positive thing is that the materials are coming into the picture finally. Anders and beyond GDP. Yes, it's not the first time. Many times those things were mentioned. Why the GDP has survived, even if Kuznets already in 1929 has said that it's not measuring well-being, it's actually measuring economic activity. It has survived because I think it's simple, very much in our mind. Also for politicians, easy to use. And actually what is interesting, they basically, which is even more showing this short-termism prevailing in our mind, even more talking about growth rates than actually the level achieved. But you don't go to the shop and say, I'm growing 5%, give me that. No, you go there, how much it's your level and where you are. And simply, I think that, again, this is mountaining, but one of the experiences which I've had in policy life, it's very simple. You get frustrated, but you repeat, and when you are fed up of yourself, you repeat it again. And then suddenly the things change and you basically don't know why the hell they changed exactly that time. But it was obviously that this critical mass, it's growing in different areas and the things start to move. And I think the same will happen sooner or later with GDP. With circular economy, it happened in the same way. I have introduced it 2014. The same year, end of the year, next commission removed it from agenda. Next year, they put it on the agenda. In 9 years, it's the globally prevailing concept. So, yeah, but a bit patience. So, Peter, you basically hit the problem. It's even bigger than you said. Yes, we are in a bubble, but unfortunately, all humanity is pretty much living in a bubble. That's the problem, not that we are in a bubble here. And many of those things, including the election results, are simply showing that we simply don't understand yet what are the real challenges. And you are right. So we aspire to have, but there is a slight change. Young generation has a bit different than our generation, at least mine, definitely. So we were successful having a car, having a good house and so on. Young generation, it's more thinking about having mobility, having a place to live, less in owing, from two reasons: because they a bit better understand what is going on, and because they don't have alternative, because we have pushed them into that kind of situation. So I think hopes are there for that kind of new approach. Not that that would go as quickly as one would like to. And I also agree with you that if you look to the figures, Europe's role, it's relatively limited. But we shouldn't underestimate the things which were done many times with regulation, which we have introduced in Europe. And it was quickly then in years copied, including in China. China was very much copying European environmental legislation. But I will conclude with that. Lessons learned from COVID are really interesting because they are telling us few things. One, if we think the things are serious, we act. Second, the governments act too little, too late, and only when all other options are exhausted. Third, system change is actually possible. Would you imagine working from home, which is today a new normal, without COVID, if we would try to introduce it 2019? Never. It's possible, and we got used to that. Fourth, human needs. So there it's possible also that we look a bit into the mirror and find out some pleasure in that. Just ask yourself how many of the clothes you're wearing during the COVID comparing to the pre-COVID or now post-COVID period. And that's actually defining clothes as human needs. And then ask yourself a very simple question: were you more happy or less happy because of that? No, I was more happy because I was constantly wearing the things which were comfortable. So, you know, a bit of that kind of logic, I think it breaks the walls. And unfortunately, one of the conclusions is also that we are not yet taking climate change seriously.
Thank you. Thank you, Janez. And I'm really mindful of the time, of course, although we started with a slight delay also. But I would like to give the floor to Geraldine for your final remarks on this. And there is actually a specific question that if you can respond to quickly, was about the role of municipalities and regions also, because very often it's top down from the capital, from the member states towards their economy and society when the public funds are being channelized to. And if you see, say, a greater role for this inclusive discussions on the public investments coming from subnational levels, but are there, let's say, prospects, but also challenges for the green transition for this kind of an inclusive approach, bearing in mind also the political situation in many across member states, and that we do face green skepticism. But I would say also opportunities that if we include them more, and I know that this is, I mean, coming from the Commission, it's there are a number of layers of governance there, but if you have any additional reflections, that would be helpful. And also on the trade-offs that you also mentioned, that there are short-term trade-offs when it comes to the green transition, but we have the long-term objectives to attain. But based on your experience thus far and on public investments, if what are, let's say, some key messages also for the way forward to try overcome this short-termism, to keep it in mind, but to overcome it so that we can achieve the green transition, but also that is also in accordance with our economic objectives and overall well-being, I would say.
And if I may, I'll also respond to a few things, because so a few on the beyond GDP. So I think it's not that we shouldn't throw away the GDP concept, because it's a concept that's useful. We need to know what it measures. So it measures indeed economic production, but it's a good reference. It's not the only thing. And I wouldn't say that we need to decouple. We need to take into account also the natural capital. And by the way, we are doing next week a conference in the ECFIN on exactly that topic, the natural capital. So it's not that we not take it into account, but we need to take it into account in our thinking. And I think there is lots of initiative in the Commission, in working group to see what are the, and indeed there is one in the foresight report, but lots of others indicators that are being developed to try to capture indeed what is beyond the GDP. So it's not that it's nor in the Commission, but
GDP is part of well-being. We agree.
Okay, exactly. So it's just an addition, and I agree, and we fully agree that we need to take that into account. The second part is that when you say because we had a debate on that, and I think I agree to some extent. The risk is that we lose the public, and that I think that's what I mentioned at the end of my talk, is that we need, and that's probably the challenge for this and the next commission, is to make sure that we continue to get the support of the public, because we are now, everybody start realizing that it's costly. It's like it change your habits, and then it's a bit of a trade-off, what you said, because if you price too much, it costs too much, and you lose the public. So we have so if you start saying that it's costing so much for the public, we will lose them. So we need to find, and I think it links to you. So what we need to do in the short term, we need to find ways to support adequately the ones that needs to be supported, so that we have support, but not too much to keep the price signal. So there is this trade-off that we need to find, and that I think it's an important one. But also the fact that we see all these floods and so on and so forth, in a certain way, it's changing. It's not probably as abrupt as the COVID, but I believe that it's changing also the attitude, because people start realizing this is coming, and okay, it's bad, but in a certain way, we can take the good lessons of it, and hopefully this will change the habit. And I fully agree with you. The young generation, I have kids, and they're completely different than I was, and their approach, they're much more conscious of all this challenge that we have. Also there was like this question of, oh yeah, we are financing fossil fuel modernization fund and so on and so forth. But I'm envy you in a certain way. When you're in the NGO, you can be the good ones, the extremists and so on, but we have to find deals. So in a certain way, yes, we finance new initiative, but we cannot throw away and saying to all the industry, I mean, for day one, now it's gonna cost so much. I mean, nobody would do it. So you need to find sweeteners. You need to facilitate the transition. And that's why exactly we are financing. We have this modernization fund. We are continuing. We have some free allowance, because you cannot go at a big bang. It would never work. So yes, but it's better than the past. So I think we have to keep that in mind. On the local and regional level, I mean, I would say different things. First, at the RF, it's more a program that was addressed at federal level. This is clear, more than the cohesion policy. At the same time, there was this requirement by all member states to consult indeed the local and regional authority. To some extent, they've done it, maybe not enough. It's true. Part of it, I mean, we have pushed them for doing it. Part of the reason is also speed. They need to come up with this program very, very rapidly. At the same time, this debate is a bit unfair. In particular, for example, Spain, the Spanish government, they got a lot of money because they got reforms. They did reforms first, and the money has not yet been disbursed because the investment is not there yet. So in a certain way, the public see, yeah, okay, I've seen all these monies in the government, and where is the money for me? But that's going to come as well. So I think there is part of the story that is a bit of a fake story. The money will come in the beginning. For the moment, is in the government account because the investment has not taken place. But in a way, it's nice. They have done the reform, which we have asked them to do in the beginning. So I wouldn't say. And the last word is administrative capacity. So that is clearly an issue that we have stressed. And I agree with you. So having a good project pipeline, this is clear, and that's something that we need to do even more.
Thank you so much for your reflections. And just to say, in the end, thank you for our panelists, for your contributions, and for the participants for active involvement. I would say lots of progress being made, but more remaining to be done, of course, to achieve this transition. But it's good to take stock of this discussion in the run-up to the elections. Happy to have you for our future discussions, and thank you very much. Have a nice day.